current situation and problem formulation. Tomorrow, at the same time, in the same room, part B will take place. And that part will focus on new demands and strategies for the future. And all this regards gender mainstreaming. When the UN held the Fourth World Conference on Women in Being in 1995, the world's government adopted the Platform for Action. Since then, no World Conference on Women's Rights has been held. The need is great, you all know, but the fear of backlash is even greater. For this reason, the Nordic Women's Movement decided to arrange Nordic Forum here in Malmö. It's a continuation of the Nordic conferences, the first held in Oslo in '88 and in Åbo in 1994. There were thousands of activists, organizations and politicians gathered at these occasions, and the result was concrete proposals to promote gender equality between women and men. Whatever the UN decides regarding the fifth conference, Nordic Forum is important in order to identify challenges and possibilities in the implementation of being Platform for Action, and also to achieve the goals in the platform: gender equality, development and peace. It will give us the possibility and the space to formulate demands directed to the Nordic governments and other politicians. And there is a final document. It's a draft document at the moment, and it has been prepared during 1.5 years already by the 200 women's organizations behind the Nordic Forum. I guess you have seen it on the website. You can find it if you haven't already read it. And this declaration this document is a declaration of intent for the future based on the Nordic Forum's 12 themes. But we are only dealing with one of these themes today. Let me now turn to the qualified panel here, and I would like you to introduce yourself. And please, Lene, if you start.
Okay, my name is Lene Nilsen, and I'm working at the Equality and Anti-Discrimination Ombud in Norway. And I've been working with gender equality issues for about 14 years in different aspects. And I will have my outside view on how the situation is in Norway right now.
Yes, and my name is Johanna Kantola. I come from Finland, Helsinki, and I'm a researcher, so I work in the University of Helsinki. I've been researching these kinds of issues, gender equality policies, for over 10 years now. I did my PhD 10 years ago in the University of Bristol, so I have kind of a different perspective from the two of you.
And Gertrud?
Yeah, I'm Gertrud Åström. I'm the president of the Swedish Women's Lobby, but that's what I do, and I have nothing else to do. Is it on?
Mm-hmm.
But as a professional, I work with gender equality issues, especially with gender mainstreaming, and I've done that for 20 years. So I've worked with it from the very beginning in Sweden. And I work a lot on the local level with municipalities, but I've also worked at other parts of the society, in state agencies, at the government level, and I've done some studies on it as well.
Yes, thank you very much. I also would like to introduce our rapporteur, Katarina. You can introduce yourself also, please. Would you like?
Representing the Swedish Women's Lobby Organization. I'm in the board for the Swedish Women Lobby Organization, but I've also, as Gertrud, worked with gender equality and gender mainstreaming for more than 20 years. And my role today is to find out if these phenomenal women will say and maybe come with something new that will complement this piece of papers that we were talking about earlier, that will be the end document that we will give to the ministers on Sunday, the draft. And since it's still a draft, we are also very interested if you have any comments, if you want to include something in this draft. And if you want to do that, you can either write it on a piece of paper yourself and give it to me afterwards, or I have some papers here, so you can maybe put some words down that could complete this draft. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Katarina. When all your proposals or other proposals really have come to the text committee, they will finalize the document and it will be handed over to the Nordic Gender Equality Ministers and to the UN Women Executive Director, Mrs. Mlambo Nguka, during the closing ceremony on Sunday. So in order to support your contribution to the final document and for your information, if you haven't already seen the final document, I would like to show you a part of the draft, only the part relating to gender mainstreaming. Is it this? Okay, thank you. Well, here you can see that the Nordic governments, that the forum and we really demand the governments to anchor and specify gender mainstreaming in national laws, regulations, processes across all its policies, and adopt and fund specific actions for the effective implementation of gender mainstreaming. And then also that the government agencies are mandated to include a gender equality perspective in all its activities and to properly implement gender mainstreaming, which entails training of all relevant personnel, gender budgeting and other control processes, gender and gender equality analysis, as well as mechanisms and procedures for monitoring. Action plans are formulated with guidelines, criteria, indicators, values, key performance indicators, and sex disaggregated data and statistics in order to identify and eliminate obstacles to the effective integration of gender equality. And the last point is that the Nordic governments use gender mainstreaming in all international commitments, including the post-2015 agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. Yes. Så ska man stänga av den här. Det är svårt. Kanske jag kan få hjälp med. Tack. I think it is. It could be relevant to know a little bit what has been prepared for this conference. With being the Being Platform for Action, I think you could focus on the last few years. But I am very interested to hear if the action plan, if the Being Action Plan really has had an impact on the development. So let's start, Lina, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's a paradox that the Nordic countries are many times at the top of gender equality indexes, but I think that we have walked different roads. And to draw the broad perspective, I would say that the gender mainstreaming strategy has not been the main road that we have followed in Norway. So I would just start to say that, and my message is that we need to revitalize the strategy, and it's not the strategy itself, but the implementation that has not been done properly. So, and it's very important that the women's movement and independent institutions take the lead in revitalizing the strategy. So that was my first message. Just to inform you, before the last election, the former government asked for a broad analysis of the situation in Norway when it comes to gender equality in an intersectional perspective. And this Equality Commission was headed by Professor Hege Skeie from the University in Oslo, and they documented several remaining challenges when it comes to gender equality in Norway in all areas, I would say. So, despite the fact that we have a lot of remaining challenges when it comes to gender equality in every policy field in Norway, I think gender mainstreaming is a vital part of the double strategy to gender equality. We need gender-specific policies, but we also need a gender mainstreaming strategy, because this strategy has the potential to prevent discrimination and to promote equality. It's proactive, and it's questioning the status quo and demanding transformation. So that was a little bit back to the Beijing, because in Norway we really need to know these things. The danger is, of course, that we equip women, we make women capable, and then the system is not able to use the women, because we have not changed the system, only the women. And in the worst cases, we mainstream women. So we have a challenge with not using the gender mainstreaming strategy enough in Norway. But anyway, the strategy is legally anchored in our Gender Equality Act. It's both a duty for public authorities at all levels to promote equality, whether they are employers or decision makers or budget allocators or providing services. And also employers have a duty to make active efforts to promote equality within their framework, and the same applies to employers and employees' organizations. And we also have some of those specific policy instruments that are following the strategy, such as at least in the central administration, we have gender impact assessment. We have instruction to do that, and we also have that when it comes to the budget propositions. I'm sorry. So, in my opinion, it's not the strategy that are the cause of the lack of results in Norway, but it's the lack of implementation of the strategy itself. And there are a lot of reasons why that is happening. And the Equality Commission concluded in some years ago that all public authorities fail to sufficiently mainstream gender equality as a matter of routine in their work, both as employers, service providers, resource allocators, policymakers, and when they are making rules, regulation, and other things. And that one of the reasons for this is that the positive duties that are described in the law are too vague. So the subject of the law, they don't know what to do. And the other thing is that, of course, as we all know, when equality considerations are in conflict with other interests, they have to yield often. And so lack of prioritization, and also when it's done, it's on engaged people within the system that are doing the work. It's not systematic, it's not monitoring, leaders are not evaluated upon their performance on gender equality. And this commission also concluded that we have not the administrative structure to implement the national policy for gender equality, so we don't have the knowledge to do it in real life. So my last point, and I dare to say that the women's movement in Norway and also other institutions promoting women's rights and equality has not been sufficiently interested in this strategy and to implement it. And that's the problem, because what we have been seeing now is the efforts that are done are it's happening with a bureaucratization, a defeminization. It's not ideology anymore. It's just 50-50, and that I would say it's male streaming and not gender mainstreaming in the interest of women and women's rights. So we really need that the women's movement these days take action to revitalize the strategy. I will stop there.
Thank you, Lina. It was not a too light picture of Norway, but I think that you really told that you have a lot in place regarding the strategy. Okay. Thank you. Johanna?
Yep. So over to Finland. So I already introduced myself by saying that I'm a researcher, and I tend to be one of these gender and politics scholars who always sees the glass as half empty. So I was quite surprised when I kind of started to prepare my 5 minutes, and I found the glass half full in terms of gender mainstreaming in Finland. And what I did was I started to look in you all know the European Union's EIGE, the Gender Equality Institute in Vilna, and they do these reviews of the Beijing platform priority areas. So they have just this spring done this. It's called the Effectiveness of Institutional Mechanisms for the Advancement of Gender Equality, and gender mainstreaming is included in this report. And I went through it, and Finland comes on the top, or it's the number 1, shared with France in terms of gender mainstreaming. So it scored 14 out of 16 points. And Sweden was on the shared second place with Spain with 13.5 points. So we can discuss this indicator politics, which I'm very critical of. But it was kind of helpful because I went through all the, I've done research into gender mainstreaming, but I've kind of, for the past 2 years, I've been doing other things. So now I went back to gender mainstreaming, especially when Birgitta asked us to focus on the past 2 years. So I found kind of my old stuff slightly irrelevant, and I kind of saw some progress. So Finland is a bit more positive in that sense. And during these first 5 minutes, I explain why I'm positive, and then when we have the panel discussion, I can be my critical self. So the first thing, kind of this EIGE, this indicator about gender mainstreaming, they measure the status of government's commitment. So this is where both Finland and Norway would do well, because it's a legal obligation. It's very clearly a legal obligation in Finland for public authorities. Then also for employers, we have this duty to do gender equality planning, both on the public and private sector. Then the EIGE report and the indicator, they measure the structures, gender mainstreaming structures, including kind of what do we have in place on the governmental level. So here as well, I think we can see progress in Finland. So we have this, the ministries have gender equality working groups that are in charge of gender mainstreaming, and then they do work between the ministries. They have kind of a coordinating gender equality group, and then they cooperate with the gender equality unit, the kind of the government body who's traditionally been in charge of gender mainstreaming. And these working groups meet regularly. They can kind of, so the structures start to be in place. you know. We'll probably go into a discussion about what is needed in terms of making gender mainstreaming more permanent and not just ad hoc project-based. So this is clearly like one way where Finland has achieved something. Where we didn't do that well, but where we did kind of fairly well, was this point about consultation, who talks to whom. So in most cases of doing kind of gender equality policies and other policies, the government consults the gender equality unit, but not always. So only on some new policies they are consulted. In Sweden, always, and in Denmark, not at all. So we lost some points there. But then we do have this, what Lena, you mentioned, gender impact assessment, gender budgeting. We have made clear progress there as well. So when this was kind of, I was involved in 2005 when Finland had the presidency of the European Union, and we did for the first time the indicators on this. And in 2005, gender budgeting, for example, it was quite a new thing. It had been introduced to some ministries and it was kind of being tested. So now there has clearly been progress on this as well. It's becoming kind of more known. It's not widely used. I'm not claiming that, and no one would claim that, but there has been some progress. And here I want to say that the most progress, Spain has had the most progress. So Spain has been very, very advanced with these things. And just to quote from the report, because this is a Nordic conference and we don't have anyone from Denmark on this panel, but it had the sentence that in Denmark it became an unknown concept in 2012, while it was used in some ministries in 2005. So reflecting, when I've kind of done this, I've also done comparative research with the Nordic countries, so we often see Denmark as a deviant case. It's falling behind in terms of many of these issues that we are, so I just want to flag it up there. Then finally, kind of about gender impact assessment of laws and policies. In this EIGE report, Finland is quoted as doing this gender impact assessment sometimes. So we scored points there. But when I looked at our national reports, we have also had this, you mentioned Hege gender equality report in Norway. So we had a big one in Finland as well in 2010. And it's been recently evaluated. So there we can see that only 14% of new government proposals for laws are gender impact assessment has been done. So okay, it's very low still. It was 5% in 2004 or 5, so it's going up, but it's not great. But other things that are kind of good and why the glass is half full is that we have kind of regular training of governmental employees, also at the highest political level. And we do this gender monitoring and kind of evaluation as part of the gender mainstreaming, as I guess is done in Sweden as well. So this is the positive picture, and then I wholly agree with the critical points, and we can go into them in the discussion.
Thank you very much. What I hear really is that there is always gender mainstreaming already is in the legislation in Norway and Finland. And this is what is asked for in the final document. So there are not so many countries really that have to do that. And it seems as if the structure is there, but also in Finland the implementation is poor. 14% of all authorities, that's not much. Okay, please, Gertrud.
Okay, thank you. I can recognize some of the things both from Norway and from Sweden, but perhaps there are some differences. I think that gender mainstreaming has partly been a success story in Sweden and partly has been a disaster. And that the organizations who take the lead, who are in front and doing the best work, has differed. When we started with municipalities. That was in, and we worked with the Swedish Association of Local Authorities and did a lot of good work. Of course, it was tiny projects, but it was they were okay. It was then that I invented the 3R method because we needed a simple method to understand what we were doing. We were actually doing gender mainstreaming. Then came the agencies, and we thought now everything will happen, and suddenly the municipalities fell asleep. And the municipalities, or the agencies, they worked, and within the cabinet office, the government office, an action plan for implementation of gender mainstream was adopted in 2004 and is still up and running. And it was targeted towards some of the most important processes within the cabinet office, the budget process and the process for acts. So we were very, very, very happy for that. We had indicators, we have indicators. So it seemed we were going the right direction. But I think since 2006, we had an election, and suddenly the agencies, they stopped working with it. And the plan was still there, but wasn't that active. And Katarina, who is our rapporteur today, she was one of the first experts appointed in Sweden at the regional level, at the county councils, in 1995 already. But suddenly the agencies, they stopped working with it. One of the county councils, from having a full-time expert, when we looked at the annual budget for that county council, I will not say which one, they had the enormous amount of 10,000 Swedish kronor for all the gender equality work for 1 year. Yes. You don't even get a cup of coffee for that. So the funding suddenly wasn't there. So it seems that you can do everything perfect, correct, from the book, from the platform for action, but it's not enough. So I would say that the political will is absolutely the most important thing, and that is regardless if you're at the national level, regional level, or the local level. But of course, the most important level is the national level. It is what the government says. So for instance, we don't have any act. We don't have any legal obligation on gender mainstreaming, though we've asked for it. And we, of course, refer to our neighbors and also to the Amsterdam Treaty, where actually I always try to use it as an act. But also big organizations were working. I mean, sports organizations, unions, they worked a lot. And the positive thing that I think a lot of the exhibitions here, they are a result of gender mainstreaming. They are the result of the work carried out in local authorities in Sweden during the last, say, 5 years. And I have had the opportunity to work, not in all, but almost in all, but in several of them. And I think there's the lesson that we can learn. Political commitment, training of all the workers, of all the employees, methods, knowledge building, follow-up structures. But if those who are in charge, if they don't support it, it will not happen. And we could see that in the cabinet office as well. We had a plan, but when the ministers stopped asking, well, how it's going with the gender budgeting process, no one is doing it. So I think that cannot be stressed enough. But what happened, gender equality issues, even in Sweden, is a very, very tiny little political field with almost no money whatsoever. But suddenly in 2008, a ten-folding of the sum, from 40 million a year to 400 million a year. I think everyone thought, oh, it's an error. It's 1 zero too much in the budget. But it wasn't, it was true. And some of these money, they were targeted towards the Swedish Association of Local Authorities. So that is another lesson. You need the money, but you perhaps should target it to very normal organizations who have muscles and who are accepted in the municipalities, in the organizations who are supposed to do all the work. So I think we have a lot of lessons to learn from the municipalities. And as I said, the agencies, they were sleeping, really sleeping. But suddenly now they are up and running again. And why? Because the government said, you have to. You have to do it. And that's the only reason, actually. So, I agree that if you lose the very meaning of it, this is a strategy. It's not a goal. If there is no politics, if there is no political will, if the political heart is not at all awake, then no strategy in the world can change our societies. So I think we should divide the critics. Are we really critical of the politicians who are not doing what they should do on gender equality politics? Or are we critical about the strategy? Because one thing is for sure, it has been the most successful strategy that we've had for really implementing gender equality in ordinary structures. And I stop there.
Thank you very much. That sounds positive again.
Yes.
Up and down, up and down.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess that you will not go to the bottom again. You will always be higher and higher up when you go back.
I think it might fall to the very bottom, but I don't. Today we have to be positive, but I think that the work carried out in the Swedish municipalities, I don't know about that. It's a real work carried out, and there are new changes. It's real routines that have been changed. There are new roads built. There are new methods adopted that really changes. For instance, surgeons, and we have really done real things that affect every woman, every man who enters the room or enter the municipal office. That will not fall back. So I think you have to go into very concrete detail, very, very concrete, and with respect for the professionals. It's only the professionals who can actually do it.
Okay. You wanted to comment?
No, I wanted to comment about this fallback and kind of the political times that we are in, because at least in Finland we're going to have general parliamentary elections next spring, and many of you might know that we have the formerly called the True Finns Party, now the Finns, which is like the Sverigedemokraterna, which might be in the government. So I think it will be a test for a lot of these structures that I mentioned, like in the ministries and their resilience, and it will be a test for kind of gender equality politics. I currently do research on gender and political parties, and I think that the times are very interesting when I've kind of been interviewing the politicians. So the politicians in all of the other parties, they know the rhetorics of gender equality and they know the rhetorics of gender mainstreaming, which is encouraging as such. But here the Finns differ very strongly.
Yes. Well, the risk for a backlash is evident. And of course, as he said in the draft document from this conference, it says that it's evident that the work hasn't been systematic as it should, and it has moved too slowly in the Nordic countries, and that is in all Nordic countries. And you really told that also. But if we look at Europe, and I read, I saw a study on institutional capacity for gender mainstreaming in all the EU member states. And this is not yet published, but it is done. And there you can see that the 3 Nordic countries who are members of the EU they were among the 5-6 countries that had performed best in implementing gender mainstreaming. So it is different in different countries. And I would like to ask the panel if any one of you can comment why do we have a more positive development in the Nordic countries, or the main obstacles might be the political will, as you said, Gertrud, and this is also confirmed by a lot of European colleagues, that when you change governments, you know, you could go back very easily. But do you have any comment?
Yeah, I have, but Lenny, do you want to? Yeah, okay. No, I just want to make kind of one of these, maybe a broader point about gender equality politics in the Nordic countries and in the EU, of which Norway is not a member, but clearly the EU politics has been shown to really impact on Norway as well. So I think the EU is very interesting from the point of view of the Nordic countries, because it's based on a different kind of gender equality model. It's a very kind of anti-discrimination centered model. So anti-discrimination law is very strong. So if you think about equal pay, for example, so we tend to tackle it through kind of collective bargaining and kind of positive action and positive measures. And in the EU, it's a question about discrimination. So I think this is a beneficial frame for us. But in terms of gender mainstreaming, we see the other side. So why the Nordic countries come on top? Because we have a different tradition. We are used to, all of us had a history, or at least Finland and Sweden had a history of gender mainstreaming. It was not called gender mainstreaming. In Finland, it was called the equality permeation principle. The equality had to permeate all policy already in the 1980s. So it relates to the kind of the whole mindset and the whole kind of institutional and policy framework of gender equality policy. Gender mainstreaming fits it quite well, this way of kind of a positive action and gender mainstreaming instead of anti-discrimination. And it's a point about Europeanization, it's a point about the EU, like what we get and what we give. Yeah. And we are here quite different. So this is, I think, one reason why we can't come on top. It's not kind of completely brought to us by the EU, like it is brought to many other member states. For example, to Eastern Europe, where it's kind of something maybe negative and imposed top-down. So just this one point.
Seems it's interesting and seems reasonable. Yeah. And Lena?
Yeah. I also think it's interesting that many of the EU countries that we also are cooperating with are maybe in the phase that we were in early 2000. When gender mainstreaming was more institutionalized in the central administration, and there was a belief in this strategy, and that we, among other things, see in Spain. So I think that this goes in phases, and we have at least in my country, come to the phase that this has been too much top-down policy. And we need to, I really mean that if someone is going to take the lead here, the women's movement and independent actors has to make the government responsible. And as Gertrud says, it's a strategy, and without political will, okay, if we don't have political will, how can we create monitoring mechanisms that will make them responsible and that we can demand some results? So we really need to lift it up again now.
Yeah, and if I continue on your idea there, I fully agree, because now we see partly in Norway, it hasn't happened yet, but the discussions are there on a new family policies. Perhaps it will come in Sweden, perhaps it will come in Finland. We know it has come in Denmark. And if you have family policies that say that women should stay home, then are we supposed to mainstream that policy? And I know, I have discussed with colleagues from Norway, yes, that is what happens. But gender mainstream is a strategy based on the idea of change, of promoting full human rights for women, promoting the platform for action. So I think we have to actually lift up political discussions to say, you have to have a political goal. You have to want to change the society, and then we can actually have a very effective strategy. I find myself having the goals that I need when I work in the local municipalities. I can use the goals that we have. We have the national goals, and then I know them, and we use them to be strong. But I can also say that the civil society, women's organizations and other organizations are extremely important to put pressure on the politics and on mainstreaming. If you go to the Swedish Women's Lobby's monitor, there are some reports, because every year we make an assessment of the state budget. I mean, we do it with all the lousy resources that we have, but we do it. And we actually use the plan for implementation that was adopted by the government. So we use the government's own words. We use the goals decided by the parliament. But I think that civil society and women's organizations, they have to get up and working on this. You cannot leave it to everyone else, because we are the ones who we want most. We want this to happen. And so we have election this autumn, you know, as a thought. And you have next year. But for me, gender mainstreaming is about structural changes. It's not anti-discriminatory. It's not about the individual who will not be discriminated, because that we have. Gender mainstreaming is something, for me, completely different.
Yes. Thank you, Gertrud. I think that was really interesting, and that you tried to push the civil society again. We can go back to Beijing, if you remember, if some of you were there, because we at that time had a very hard pressure from the civil society. But during the years, it has been weakened. I don't know why, but now, perhaps the pressure will come again. I think that's a very good sign and a hope for the political will. Yeah. I would like to go further and ask you about issues that are related to the political will, actually, because in our Nordic countries and in Europe also, gender mainstreaming actions are often supported with external funds, for example, by the government. This is the case in Sweden. I guess you have the same in the other countries, perhaps not in Norway. But also EU funding, and I know that Norway also get EU funding for gender mainstreaming projects. But sometimes external funding creates problems in relation to ownership or leadership of the project. It can be unclear who is responsible for the implementation and for the results. And sometimes the leadership doesn't recognize projects as ordinary work. And in that case, the staff doesn't give priority to the project either. However, one of the prerequisites for full implementation of gender mainstreaming is active leadership as well as responsibility at the top level, in an organization, in the political organization, etc. Do you have any idea how to tackle this dilemma? Because we still work with external funds. Is anyone? Yeah?
Well, I can start by confirming the dilemma. That I think it is a real dilemma, and the whole role of external funding to, for example, women's movements, women's organizations, and then gender equality work. And we have a scholar in Finland called Kristiina Brunila who did her PhD about this, and she used the term projectified gender equality work, when it becomes totally project-based. And I've been interested in it myself and kind of formulated this term called market feminism as opposed to state feminism. You know, state feminism, what we had in the Nordic countries, was kind of about you. And the femocrats working in the state, using the state and kind of engaging it and so on. And now I ask in my research that are we seeing this move towards market feminism, which is informed by this kind of external funding, where it's the EU or whoever is kind of directing your goals. You want to work on a specific area, but you have to write your project application to match the goals of this kind of external funding. And then a lot of other issues goes with it. It's always kind of short term, it's not long term. It makes you miss bureaucracy. Feminists have been critical about bureaucracy, but I think these are the times when we actually sometimes, or oftentimes, we miss bureaucracy as opposed to privatization and kind of outsourcing, consultation. We'd rather have kind of permanent state employees, people working in the state, doing these things. So it is a dilemma. It can enable things. We have a lot of research, a lot of experience about what it has enabled, but I think we have to be very kind of clear about the risks and costs as well to feminists. Like, what is market feminism if kind of our priorities and our practices are determined by this external funding? And at least in Finland, and I think we have many examples here, I'm a bit hesitant to be very kind of critical about this, but at least in Finland we have a project, and then you always have to have kind of an outcome of the project. And you know, when you have a project on equal pay, then you have a visible outcome. Like, we have this very famous, how do you call it, this thing?
The coin.
The coin, where you have cut the 20% or the 19% away. And this is an outcome of a project. But then when you ask that, what does it do to the gender pay gap? So a lot of things go with this kind of projectification and its logic and what you have to do.
Well, Lena?
Yeah, I just had another side of the ownership problem. It's not only outsourcing is an easy solution and will not change an organization, so I think we can agree upon that. But also when it comes to politicians, and we have other and bigger problems, I think, that we discussed earlier, that they don't really have ownership because we have this myth that people can choose whatever they want. Yes. There's no structural barriers to their choices, and we see that really now happening in Norway, that the politicians are claiming that actually family-friendly policies are our own choice, our free choice, without seeing all the economic structure, the historical structures around. So we really need to work on explaining how structures are limiting our own choices, and because they don't find gender mainstreaming relevant. We have equality, we can do what we want. So we need to get away with that myth. And we also have to remember that at least politicians at top levels are rational actors in the way that they have one goal, they want to be re-elected. And if it's like in the people that we don't need any more policies for equality, well, they don't propose any new policies. So we have a problem with the minds of the politicians that are more short-sighted than Beijing action plan.
Especially since gender mainstreaming is a very long time strategy. I mean, you have to work very strategic and during a long period, and this is not political in a way. I mean, it's for the bureaucrats. However, do you see any positive trend or a positive thing with external funds, Gertrud, or is it really negative? I mean, if you're going to integrate gender equality in the ordinary work, it should be financed by the organization, of course, because then they are responsible for what they do and they take it seriously. But are there any positive?
Yes, I think, but it is quite demanding, because I fully agree on the projectification. And it's rather paradoxical, because it was an analysis made in the late 80s that gender equality work only was project-driven. That is one of the reasons we decided to work with gender mainstream, to get rid of these projects all the time. That is why we got the experts on the county councils, to have experts fully employed just to work with this. And now we are back to projects again. So we are, beforehand we have projects on doing gender equality work. Now we have projects on gender mainstream. It's really paradoxical. So, yes, I think, but I think the program at the Swedish Association of Local Authorities and Regions, HOY, Sustainable Gender Equality, has proven that you can target external funding to a municipal, committee or whatever. So it is about what do you want with this money? And I think we have a lot of good stories. And since we are in Malmö, the city of Malmö, they have done most of their gender mainstreaming work with their own ordinary money. They have not been funded from anyone else. They got tiny project money from the big program from the government, but it is funded by Malmö. And I think I have been very impressed to see how they actually decide, and that is the political will. Say, yes, we will put 4 million, blah, 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 and if you do it well, you will have another possibility to get another million. And they have trained, they have really trained people working within the community, and they have a plan. And it is a long-term plan,
Yes.
until 2020. So it's because projects, they are very sold, perhaps 2 years, perhaps, or 3, but that is a very long project. And I think if you have, say, 6 months and you end up with a coin, you are happy because you got a result. And then you come asking for the effect of the coin. Hard question. But I think we are seeing it here in Malmö. I actually have seen it, that I see effects on the citizens, on the, but there aren't that many. Eskilstuna kommun, who is also here, great, they have done it. So there are several. So you shouldn't hate getting some funding, but you should hate getting it without any political will. What will happen?
Okay, thank you. We need good role models.
Yes.
So we will collect them.
I think so.
And then disseminate. I would like to speak, or to listen to you rather, about the implementation of gender mainstreaming. This is not, as we heard, it's really very difficult. You have a strategy, you know what to do, but the implementation is poor anyway. So, and we also spoke about goals. It's important with national goals. Gertrud told us about that. And I would like to if you have any idea of how to set goals. I mean, you can have goals at different levels, at national, regional, local level, but you can also have more specific and operational targets, which are more, it's not that long-term goals. You can also, sometimes gender equality is not seen as a goal as such in a mainstreaming project. It is more seen as a means to reach other goals and targets in an organization. For example, economic growth. It's really important to reach gender equality because it's easier to reach the target of economic growth, or that gender equality in an organization will make the organization more efficient or improve the quality of the budget process or whatever. So if you have an idea of that, how to set goals, and do we have, in order to implement gender mainstreaming, what what shall we do? Shall we have gender equality targets or gender equality goals as such? The women's rights, women's and men's rights, or should we use it as gender mainstreaming or gender equality as a means to reach other targets?
Well, I can start. For me, gender mainstreaming is no goal. It's a strategy to get the goals we have. But I think you have to have a pattern of goals. So we say you can always work towards the national goals. You can always ask yourself, is the things that we are doing in our municipality or wherever, are we really working so that women and men shall be economically independent, for instance? We can always target ourselves to the national goals. But really, if you work at the local level, the goals you have, they are within your field of expertise, within your profession. It's not, you cannot always remember that women and men should have the same power, and it was said by the Riksdag. You should remember, let's see now, we are working with elderly people, and we want the work we carried out, the services we provide for our elderly people living in our municipality who need our services. We want them to be as good as we can, and we want them to work equally good for both women and men. That is the kind of goals that are set up, and really I think they work, because then everyone can feel, I am part of the solution. So goals can be very, very aggregated at a very top level, and they can be extremely targeted. And I think the most interesting thing, that is when people start working and they find out and they do analysis, and then they put up the new goals and they are specified. We have to change that because we know the problem is that. And that is a long journey, because this lack, I mean, in the Swedish context, we have the steering model is goal oriented. So that is what we are supposed always to work like. So, but I can tell you, it's not only in gender equality issues that we don't manage to do it. I mean, I work with people who work with environmental issues, and they say the same. We have the goals, we have the plans, but we don't do it.
Don't implement. Lena?
Yeah, I think I agree with you, and I also think that the national or regional or local plans with concrete goals can be the framework for gender mainstreaming, but as you say, the local units needs to do the process, the analysis themselves, because it's not so much about the result, but it's how you make a decision.
Yes.
So you need to see the gender perspective yourself in order to take wise decisions. So it needs to go down to the very concrete level.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I also?
Yes?
Yeah, and I think
Johanna?
it just kind of picks on from that. Like, I'm also interested, I think there's now scholarly interest in something called feminist implementation studies, because we've spent so much time kind of trying to get these things on the agenda. But now we want to see whether they work and why don't they work. And gender mainstreaming is, of course, a perfect example. And there's a parallel panel where someone called Ann-Charlotte Kallistig is, and she just did her PhD on this kind of feminist implementation study of gender mainstreaming, and Malmö was one of her cases. I was examining it, so I know it well. But it really kind of, when I was reading it and thinking about gender mainstreaming, this idea, Lene, what you were saying, that, and a question about best practices, you know, because everyone has to do it themselves. It's a lot of hard work, and it really, and Ann-Charlotte, she makes I think a very good point, because often we want to kind of differentiate between the organization, whether you should kind of do gender mainstreaming in terms of its personnel, and in the past we have said that, okay, it's bad to confuse gender mainstreaming, which should be about policies, with kind of anti-discrimination work or work and family reconciliation in the personnel. But Anne-Charlotte makes this point that part of the implementation is that you should actually confuse this, that you can do better gender mainstreaming if you have a gender equal institution or organization or government or whatever. So it's a very complex thing when you start to mix these. And I'll be very sad if I finish and kind of, if I haven't mentioned the one thing that I would like to see on this report, and it relates to these goals and visions about gender equality. And we haven't talked at all, actually, about kind of intersectionality and multiple discrimination, and what do we actually mainstream. We have only talked about gender. We haven't talked about kind of other bases of inequality, and I was quite sorry to see that it was missing from the document. I know that it's a big issue in terms of the whole issue about diversity management and whether you can bring it. It's a very American, also very neoliberal concept, and whether you can bring it here. And gender mainstreaming is hard to implement as such. So if you bring more categories, what happens? But I think this could be one of the Nordic contributions, because if you look at the EU policy on intersectionality and multiple discrimination, again, it's very much being kind of understood and conceptualized through this anti-discrimination. You just outlaw discrimination on different bases of inequality. So then you don't bring this kind of more Nordic positive action and gender mainstreaming to the other categories of inequality. And I think this is what we should be talking about. And we should, even if we don't want to do diversity mainstreaming, we should kind of talk about these things, that what are the pros and what are the cons, what is there to be gained, and does it make it more confused and more challenging. But I don't think we can talk just about gender.
Yes, thank you very much for mentioning that. I think this is what we all know is a coming issue, and what will be difficult to deal with in the future, because we don't have much experience yet, and this will really become one of the new challenges. So I guess tomorrow we will speak a lot about that, because that's really on everyone's table, I guess, right now. Would you like to say more about that? I would like to go on, otherwise to...
Okay, a very short... It will come up then in the next session, perhaps. But I do think that anyway, where I have worked, gender mainstreaming has always been intersectional, even before the word was invented. It's not true. It is absolutely a lie to say that gender mainstreaming hasn't adopted and worked with other issues. For instance, age. We always use age. And the different perspectives that you need has to be chosen deliberately, because you have to know what are you doing. If you have a goal, we want it to be like this, and then you get some statistics, and you try to, then the most difficult part is to do the analysis of all your documentation. It's easy to well, it's not easy, but it can be done. It takes a lot of work. But then you have to make an analysis. What's the problem here? What kind of efforts do we need to solve the problem? We've always used age. We've always used the income differentiation, for instance. We've used immigrants or non-immigrants. We've used... we have used all these intersectional... So I think that's a buzzword. I think it's a buzzword to trying to say that gender mainstream is all about women and men. It's not true.
Maybe in Swedish context.
In the Swedish context, absolutely.
About the other Nordic countries as well.
Yeah, I don't know, but that is why I really don't approve when people say that we have to be intersectional. But you have only talked about gender. Gender is a very complex concept. But we know that if you work with statistics, we use women and men as the statistical basic division, sex-differentiated statistics. That is the basic that you have to do if you want to work with things. We work, for instance, with wage gap between women and men, and then we use women and men because we want to know the difference between the wages that men have and women have. But if we say, no, the problem is that we have Very, very different wages if you are young or old, if you have a high education or low education, if you are born here in Sweden or if you have come here from different countries. And if we say that the goal is that women and men should have equal pay for equal job, then you have to solve your problem by adding different perspectives. But we have 14 horizontal perspectives in Swedish policies. And if you try to work with 14 horizontal perspectives all the time, I know the results. You die. And nothing happens. And I've seen it many, many, many times. Everything becomes so complex and so complicated, so you can never do anything. Because it is a neoliberal idea that you go back, everyone is just oneself, and everyone is her or his own category. And of course, if everyone is his or her category, you can never use statistics, for instance. No. Because to use statistics, you have to accept collective ideas. It might be women, men, it might be born in Sweden or somewhere else, it might be that you are tall or short, it might be that you have high education or low education, high wage or low. So, but you must accept that politics are not done on the individual level like that. And therefore, I fully agree with the need that the individual should have the right to say, I am now discriminated because of this and that. But that will not transform society. Absolutely not. So I think that what the Swedish...
But can I just,
yes.
can I just
You
comment
might.
that...
You might.
Yes, yes.
I think that there are big differences.
Just a short
one.
Yeah.
Okay, you speak from a Swedish perspective, but from a Finnish perspective, it's very easy for us to forget about race and ethnicity. We never talk about it. We're very happy to do gender mainstreaming as long as it concerns age, income, and gender. So I think we have our silences and we have hierarchies between these categories, and we have to be aware of these hierarchies and these power relations. Absolutely. And the fact that sometimes even if you ask the people working in an organization, for them race and ethnicity might not matter, although in fact it does.
Well, we've already spoken a little bit, if we go back and speak about implementation again. We have already spoken a little bit about tools, because there are many tools, and during the last few years we've seen a development and improvement of different tools and even toolboxes for the implementation of gender mainstreaming. And already in Beijing, it was asked for, there was a demand for gender impact analysis of or gender equality analysis. But also in this study I read about the EU countries, and they evaluated what has happened, what was the most common tool and what was the least used tool. They could see that gender analysis was identified as the least common tool, and that is really, well, I was surprised, because I thought that it really was used, but it might be too complicated, I don't know why. But what is your experience of the tools available? What is most important, or what do you think is still lacking in order to better implement, as we said?
When it comes to gender impact assessments, for example, you mean? Yeah. In Norway, we have this problem that all are down to statistics. So we don't follow the CEDAW convention that says that gender equality is about substantial equality between men and women. So the analysis is not an analysis, it's not the history, it's just who will benefit from this without the analysis around. So this is, the broad picture. There may be exceptions for this, but that's the problem. And that's how this big, and we don't have monitor mechanisms for them either. So, we have the Ombud that could use the convention and say that this will not apply with the CEDAW, But how I think that it more successful at the regional level, and the municipalities that actually has done something, because they have been to Sweden and studied the method of the 4 R's. And they are coming down to not only representation, but why is there differences between men and women. You have to question the norms that we are based our decision on. And that's why this method is much more giving, I think, at the regional level than maybe at the national level, because they never get into that.
That's true.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, I think that governance is very important for the implementation, and to go from a goal to actually changing, having this effect, you have to have a chain of all the different levels within an organization. And some organizations are very complex. For instance, municipalities, they are so huge, so many people involved. But I've seen that when we start working with gender mainstreaming, not all, but some municipalities, they suddenly say, you know what we found out? We don't have any governance. We don't have any model. We don't know how things are done. So from a very little tiny work on gender mainstreaming, I have worked, for instance, in Lycksele Kommun, I can't see anyone here, and work with them not to make a steering model for gender equality and gender mainstream, but for the whole municipality. Because working with gender mainstream, it demands that you know how to govern, you have to have a steering chain. So that is what you need, and for the implementation, knowledge is needed, and therefore you need statistics. But I fully agree, it ends with the statistics. Now we have this table, now we have that one, and but no one else. And what did we learn from that? And so I'm very grateful that you say about the 3 or 4 hour method, because it was invented just because of that. Because we can start counting where are women, where are men. If we manage, we can see how resources are distributed to different fields. But if you do that thoroughly, then you will end up with the questions, as you said, Lina, why? How come? How come it is like this? And that is the hard point, and I think that is where you get resistance, because when you start asking these questions, you say, what do we have to change? Yes. What kind of representation do we have to change? What kind of allocation of resources does this point at? And that is where it is difficult, and that is when you need the whole staff with you. When they know, yes, this is what we have to do, because then they can put pressure on those who are politicians or whatever. So therefore, gender mainstreaming is extremely difficult to work with. And sometimes when I'm in countries who don't have the Nordic experience of working with gender equality policies, I say, start with something else.
Okay.
Start with doing something else, because that is too complicated. Let's go for the right to have childcare instead. It would be much more effective.
Oh. Thank you. Well, I think we have a rather good picture of the state of play right now. And also you have defined problems in all countries, and even if they look a little bit different, of course, the implementation of gender mainstreaming is still really challenging. I would like to open the floor in a few minutes, only to give you the chance to give a concluding remark on a few sentences only. And please give us inspire us all now so that we can go on and work and implement gender mainstreaming, please. If you start, Lena.
Okay, I'm not sure. I think that we need inspiration from Sweden right now, but okay. I just want to say my point once more, that there's a mismatch between what the women's movement and equality organization want and what the politicians do. And we need to bridge that gap, and we have to take the lead, I would say. And also, I think for the final document, the whole meaning about gender mainstreaming is to go away from gender neutralization. Yes. And in Norway, this is trending. So we need to turn this trend towards seeing both men and women and their needs and experience and their situation, and give a more diverse policy in order to benefit the both genders equally.
Thank you.
So that's my...
Yeah. I went into a more negative mode than in the beginning, but if I kind of think about the glass half full and why it might be half full in Finland, so I'd really kind of, I'd like to highlight the work that these femocrats have done in Finland, like in the gender equality unit, with very little resources. We have talked a lot about resources and whether you sometimes you need them, but sometimes you can have kind of very dedicated individuals who really kind of work to institutionalize these things, to delegate and to push the responsibility on the politicians and the other bureaucrats. So I think this has been one of the keys to success in Finland. But I'm very thankful also to Lene to constantly kind of highlighting the role of the women's movement and the civil society, because I think this is something that's currently maybe missing from Finland as well, and what we should kind of revitalize and bring into the gender mainstreaming process in order to politicize it and to make it more interesting and less technical and less about indicators.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, well, femocrats are extremely important. Here is one standing. Done a lot of great work, the rapporteur, I'm one of them as well. So I'm grateful for our societies that give us a position that we can actually work with it. It is tiny, and I know from Finnish colleagues that they really don't have a lot of funding or positions, but they are doing great. I think the most successful thing you can say if you work in the local level is to say that gender equality, you see, it's part of the solution of our problems, you see. So when you start to say, what's your problem in your municipality? For instance, perhaps they say the problem is demography. All our young women, they move away from here. And when you say, well, you see, gender equality might be part of the solution, and then, and then they start, you know, and I think that is true. Here in Malmö, for instance, we looked at transportation issues, and we can see that, yes, gender equality work that's targeted towards that could be part of the solution. We have Eskilstuna kommun, one of my favorite municipalities here, and they have done several work like that. This is part of the solution. And I think that is a very, very positive thought that you can always bring with you.
Thank you very much, Gertrud. That was an advice to us all. Okay, I will open the floor. If you have any questions, please feel free. And also our panel, of course.
Yeah. There is a question.
We don't have anyone here.
I have a question to Finland. You said you're doing a lot of research about all this streaming and all this stuff. When you get the answers from the research, do you implement or give solutions or rectify the problems or give suggestions to the politicians what you have found, so they can go up and do their planning and implementation.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. In a sense that, so I'm a political scientist and now I'm based in gender studies. And traditionally, the link between research and policy making has been quite close. But now, over the past years, I have friends who work in the gender equality unit and who have been researchers themselves in the past. So we've kind of seen this link loosen. Yeah. So research doesn't inform policy making that much these days. So I think we're seeing a worrying trend there. And I can't tell you why. Yeah. But I would agree with you that research doesn't feed in to the policy making well enough. And we've had, I mentioned Ann-Charlotte Kallestig's PhD here in Sweden, which is very good. And then I examined another one in Sweden, Hanna Ylöstalo, who is also speaking in a parallel panel at the moment, which was about gender equality planning in Finland, and a lot of good research. But it's not changing the problems. But it's not only that. I think the main reason is anyway kind of political, and what we have talked about, political will. So whether it wants to be heard or not. So I think we have a lot of information, we have a lot of knowledge about why things are not working. But there's not just a willingness to change things for various political reasons, you know, resources, no money, neoliberalism, let's not expand the public sector and so on. So.
Exactly. Thank you. Someone else? Oh, well, thank you all for coming here. I would like to thank the panel for a very interesting discussion here, and we have now a good picture, I would say, of what is the situation in the Nordic countries regarding gender mainstreaming. We have also had some discussions on the challenges ahead, and that will continue tomorrow in the same room here. But I'm sorry to say we will not have you in the panel at that time, but we will have new candidates, and I look forward to an interesting session tomorrow, and I hope you will come back. Thank you very much for today.
Thank you.